Greetings to you all, and thank you for standing by. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our webinar, Value-Based Contracting, Understanding the Perspectives of Payers, Providers, and Life Sciences Companies. My name is Al Salchunas, and I will be the moderator for today's discussion. I'm not quite sure whether you've all heard that, but let me say that again. Greetings to you all, and thank you for standing by. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our webinar, Value-Based Contracting, Understanding the Perspectives of Payers, Providers, and Life Sciences Companies. My name is Al Salchunas. I will be the moderator for today's discussion. Before we get to the presentation, I do have a few housekeeping items. During the presentation, all participants will be in listen-only mode, so no need to put your ringer on silent. Also, today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available on our website by next week. Although lines are muted, we do encourage you to ask questions during today's presentation. Please submit any questions using the questions window located at the right side of your screen. Type your question into the box, click send, and they will be sent directly to a meeting organizer to queue for the Q&A session we will host at the end of the webinar. Should you encounter any technical difficulties during the webinar, please also utilize the questions window to describe your issue, and one of our support staff will follow up with you to troubleshoot. I'm happy to introduce today's panelists. Dr. Kevin Keck is an eminent physician with about 25 years of experience filled with numerous achievements. Before coming to SCIO, he was a palliative care physician at the Permanente Medical Group and Chief of Medicine at Kaiser Permanente. One of his greatest achievements includes the creation of a value-based benefit design for the Providence Health Plan, where he held the position of a CMO. As SCIO's, now EXL's, Chief Medical Officer, Kevin leads the clinical analytics development team. His responsibilities include assessing the leakage and the impact of quality and cost in provider analytics. He provides valuable insights on prescriptive analytics used to measure the impact on the therapeutic drug classes based on member risk levels. David Hom is the organization's Chief Evangelist, interacting and engaging with our strategic audiences to understand their needs based on the changing healthcare landscape and to solve their impending issues. Dave is an internationally recognized expert in the field of consumer engagement through programs such as value-based benefits and employee wellness. He joined SCIOHealthAnalytics in 2009 after more than 25 years with Pitney Bowes Corporation, where he was responsible for introducing their leading-edge programs in value-based wellness and responsible for reducing medical trend by 50% of the industry average each year for 15 years. Dave has been a visionary at SCIO and has built SCIO's leading products on behavioral economics applications for many health plans and a technology-enabled solution to engage members based on the gap value and its impact on avoidable hospital events. John Pagliuca, SCIO's Vice President of Life Sciences, leads the global commercialization effort of SCIO's advanced analytics and software as a service solutions within the life sciences market. He has nearly 20 years of sales, marketing, and technology experience in quantitative analytics and software solutions for life sciences. John has authored a number of articles and blogs on value-based contracting, as well as other healthcare topics. Before starting the panel discussion, I'd like to capture the audience's perspectives on value-based contracting with 3 polling questions. As each polling question is presented on your screen, please select or click on the answer that best matches your perspective. Later during this webinar, we will provide the results of the 3 polling questions and ask the panelists to provide additional commentary. So polling question number 1. The biggest challenge in conducting a value-based contract is agreeing on patient risk levels and patient exclusions, agreeing on the contract's performance metrics, agreeing on the performance metrics' acceptable levels of success, and agreeing on an objective intermediary to measure and report on contract performance results. Please submit your answers. Question number 2. The biggest problem with the analytics associated with a value-based contract is the acceptance of the underlying data set by the providers and/or payers, the ease of measuring the metrics, making the measured outcomes bulletproof, determining if interim measurements are doable. Please submit your answers now. Question number 3. What will drive life sciences companies to value-based contracting? Is it legislation, the health plans, health systems and providers, consumers, or the executive management of the life sciences companies? Please submit your answers. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for responding to our 3 polling questions. We will review the results shortly. Now I'd like to begin the discussion portion of our webinar with our 3 panelists. Let's start with Dr. Kevin Keck, CIO's Chief Medical Officer, representing the perspectives of providers when it comes to value-based contracting. Kevin will then be followed by our Chief Evangelist, David Hom, and then by John Polyuka, CIO's Vice President, Life Sciences. Kevin, please take it away.
Thank you, everybody, for attending our webinar. We truly appreciate your time and interest. I'm Kevin Keck, Chief Medical Officer, and I have experience in creating contracts, and it is quite doable as long as the parameters that we're talking about here are part of the pathway. Now, the providers and the health plans, hospitals are looking for a solution that is powerful. What can be done differently? And the value-based contract is a powerful lever. In looking at managing a population, if the providers are incented, and this can be direct dollars with physicians and direct dollars to hospitals if they have a physician group or physician leaders within the hospital. This will change the provider behavior, which is the desired outcome. Now, the measurements and incentives are the drivers of how to make the behavior changes. If the incentives are small, the behavior changes will be small. If the incentives are substantial for the provider, and substantial is anything that looks like 2 to 10% of their W-2 income, then the provider will change their behavior. So how do you go about creating the contract? And it starts with the data. The data have to be pristine. And what happens when the proposal is given to the provider community is the data are always challenged, and the sickness of the patients, who should be in the cohort, all those are issues that need to be agreed upon up front. And the agreement needs to be so that everybody's comfortable. The payer, the one who is getting the dollars for the incentive, has to be comfortable with the data, and the real skeptics are the providers. And what happens is providers will take a look at the data. They will want to see drill downs, and in particular, they're interested in being able to throw out certain members, and this has to be agreed upon so that it's a believable data set. Now, the value of the contract is giving physicians skin in the game, and I'll give you an example of a physician group in California where the risk of the contract is borne by the individual physician, both up and down. And what happens in this particular group, and it is an extreme example, is 30% of W-2 income to the physician's PC is subject to outcomes. And what happens in this situation is if that physician's patient, for example, goes to the ER last night, then that physician is motivated to call that patient up and say, next time, please call me. Here's my office phone number. We will see you. On the other hand, if the value of the risk is, say, $1,000 per physician per year, and that translates to about 4 to 6 hours of work, there will be some behavior change even with that, because of the measurements that go with that. If the value-based contract is for primary care physicians getting their mammography percentage to 80%, or their lipid panel batting average to 90%, or treatment with antibiotics for sinusitis less than 20%. If they're measured that way against their peers, and there are dollars put on it so that the physician wants to spend 4 to 6 hours a year, there will be a behavior change with that. So physicians want to have their quality measured as highest quality, and if they're paid, then that's where they will so behave. Now, given the data that go into a value-based contract, these data can be used in other areas to help drive the physician behavior change. And in the levers that are used to create quality in a risk-bearing contract, there's other levers that can be used. I've already mentioned the provider profile, letting the provider know where they are compared to their peers, and they will respond to that. These same data will provide a pathway to educate the patients in the cohort that are being managed, so that the patients can be identified and educated for behaviors that they can do to improve their health. Also, to help the benefit design of the health plan can be changed so that needed services that the payer wants to accomplish would have better insurance, like zero tier with medication, and then waiving of office co-pays, so that the patient will come in and have a motivation of a benefit, so that they will so behave. Capitation is the ultimate in giving risk to the provider, and the data will allow the risk taker to know where is a capitation situation viable. And what that looks like is a geographic area where a provider group has 80% or so of the membership going to that provider group. Then capitation can be written into the contract with either upside and downside outcomes in the deal. And then also the network choice will be helpful, that in finding who are the best providers and who is efficient, who provides the best care, who has least readmission rate, who has least admission rate. The provider network can be defined that way too. So these are other levers that can be utilized given the data. Now, here's a key point that I learned early on, is the contract structures must be understandable, meaningful, and measurable. And in going forward with a value-based contract, it's critical that these elements be foundational with the contract. What you don't do is go in and say, we're going to take a look at quality of life with this membership. We're going to measure that, and then we're going to take a look at did they have an admission for their illness or not. It's much more basic than that, so that when the parameter is out there for the provider, they get it, that yeah, this makes sense to me as a measured parameter, that if I accomplish this, then the patient is going to be better cared for, and so the providers get it. And a very simple example is with blood pressure medication possession. The patient diagnosed with high blood pressure should be taking their medication routinely. If they're not, then something needs to be done. That's understandable. And then the last thing, it's got to be measurable. When you go to your IT people, they've got to be able to come up with this without a lot of effort, and they know what to do. Lastly, with this, the importance of making it simple. Keep it simple, and you start with a basic parameter set, and it would look like we have this quality level in our patients with rheumatoid arthritis this year. So what we want is for next year to be this or better. And that's very simple, but it allows for the providers to say, well, okay, if we have to just do what we did last year and maybe improve upon it, we can do that. Then the second year of the contract, once the providers are familiar with it, then if this is the parameter for diabetes, then we want a 5% improvement or a 3% improvement on that, and then the next year it can be upside downside. But you start really simple. The providers are scared. They don't trust the situation. But if it's line of sight and they can see what they're getting into, then they will sign the contract. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dave.
Kevin, thank you. Can I ask just a couple of questions? Do you mind?
Yes.
So in an environment of a value-based payment or a bundle payment, if you're talking to an endocrinologist who manages diabetics, where there could be some significant variation in price for the prescriptions, ranging from a metformin all the way up to a class 2 type of drug, how will the physician's behaviors begin to change and the prescribing patterns change based on a value-based payment?
Well, that's a good example, and the accepted treatment for diabetes, and we're talking type 2, which is 90 to 95% of the population, is to start with metformin, and that would be called good quality. So what's expensive in diabetes are the incretin mimetics and the uricosurics and the insulins. What's not expensive are the two starter drugs, sulfonylurea and metformin. So what you would measure in that situation is what percentage of new diabetic starts on medication would be metformin, and then a second medication would be a sulfonylurea. That would be the parameter. And as the physician is measured to that, they are more apt to start with evidence-based medicine, metformin and sulfonylurea, medications that cost less than $1 a day, or actually less than 50 cents a day, as opposed to a medication that costs $6 to $10 a day. So what the provider would see is this is the quality measurement, and that's worked out. There's no question. Most diabetics should be started on metformin, and then the provider is measured against that, and that will get the behavior.
Thank you. So, John, based on our current, in terms of our experience with a couple of current clients, what we've seen from the data is when in terms of the waterfalls of patient risk. So, someone's high-risk diabetic patient, should they be on a different class drug earlier than what Kevin mentioned and be on a different dosing level, because the impacts will be significantly different on a PMPM perspective. Is that correct, John?
Yeah, no, I agree, Dave. And I agree wholeheartedly. We see that often within the analysis, the journey, the waterfall, call it what you will, that we run. What's very interesting, especially in this class, is when you start to see the patient, the look and feel, and this, for lack of a better word, the segmentation of the patient or patients in that 8 to 12 month window. What is happening when they are first put on metformin, and then where do they then migrate to? What is the overall effect, total cost of care effect of those patients? You really start to see the lines of treatment change and alter, where it flows into this conversation of it's not a one-size-fits-all when it comes to value-based care. It's going to be looked at through the lens of there are segments of patients that you can lump together. Maybe there are 10, maybe there are 8. And that's the conversation has to start that way versus let's treat all of the diabetes patients this way under a specific plan and aim for one particular metric. So it becomes more of a regional question. I think it becomes, in some cases, a sub-regional question, But then that opens up a whole slew of additional questions around the payer in terms of care they can pull through on behalf of their members. So, but yes, Dave, so short answer to your question, absolutely yes. We see it more and more recently, and it's not surprising.
Yeah, and one more comment. The measured parameter needs to be a quality parameter. What the payer wants is their diabetic cared for correctly. And if that means the member needs to be on 4 different diabetes drugs, then that's what you want to have happen. So the way you would do that in a value-based benefit is please check the hemoglobin A1C, a major marker of how well the diabetes is doing twice a year. If the provider does that, then they'll see if the patient needs more than 2 drugs or 3 drugs, and we'll add, which is what the payer wants to have happen.
Thank you. Al, can we move to my next slide? Because then I want to just give some feedback on the market.
Absolutely. Just a quick reminder to the participating audience. If you have any questions, please key them in the questions box and hit send, and we'll make sure to address them later on during this webinar. In the meantime, here we go, Dave.
Thank you. And when you do send them, they'll go into the Jeopardy box. So when the person that's winning the millions of dollars, will be able to answer the questions for you all. And a little humor, but not a lot. But so I spend a lot of time working with health plans across the country. These are health plans that cover Medicare Advantage patients, manage Medicaid, folks on the exchange, fully insured in terms of commercial lives. So what we're seeing is there's a growing need for the health plans to create more variability in their fixed cost structure. So we look at the MLRs that they're publishing. If they're spending 85 cents on a dollar, and it's $7 billion. If 6.5 billion is discounted fee for service, the plans are saying, I'm assuming all the risk, and therefore, how do I share the risk with my providers, my PCPs, and my specialists, to be the ones that are driving the large cost of care. So there's huge pressure by the plans to begin working with the life science companies, both in specialty drugs, regular prescriptions, and also devices, where they want to say, we will evaluate the placement of the drug or device based on the tiers as a function of cost and efficiency. But we want to be able to look at ways in which we can measure for outcomes. So instead of the old rebate methodologies or approach, how do we create a more of a pay for outcomes, either on a quality metrics that Kevin talks about, but also on a PMPM perspective that others are beginning to drive towards. Second, I call them headwinds, is these large entities that are occurring now, which is the Uniteds that are going vertically integrated, so they're buying physician practices, they own a PBM ready. You got Aetna/CVS, you've got Cigna/Express Scripts, you got the Walmarts emerging, you got the Amazons emerging, and you got the Humanas and others that are looking for different business combinations. And so when these vertical integrations occur, they'll be much more focused on value-based payments. Again, the way to measure the performance of physicians and other services, the value of other services, again, that'd be durable medical equipment, specialty drugs, drugs on tiers 2 and 3, is how do we measure the value of those interventions and services? What's the impact on the medical loss ratio? And how do we improve our margins in our businesses? Third major, what I call headwind for the life sciences companies is large employers are beginning to ask about these types of arrangements. So these are the monster large employers. So this would be companies like a JP Morgan / Amazon / the new entities of thinking of how do we shift and change the tide of rising cost. I can't afford this in my cost structure, having healthcare be 20% of my SG&A, of my total budgets. And if my business model is typically around people, so a lot of human capital, so those would be financial services companies, accounting firms, etc., legal firms, where the total expenses for both compensation and benefits can exceed 70% of their total expenses. They're now asking, how do I think through a value-based payment structure? They're asking the consulting firms, they're asking their health plans. And so when you see more and more of these employers drive the process, health plans will now have to come to the table, as will provider groups. We also see that this world of patient engagement, we see wide variations in patient engagement, and whether patients are engaged in health, if they're not, what are the resources needed to engage them. And the results are variable and they're different. And so how do you begin taking and tiering your populations, high risk, moderate, low, that are in terms of future risk? And then how do you use different units of services to engage the high risk patients more often than the moderate risk patients versus the low risk patients? Because if you think about the high risk patients, they only see the physician probably 20 minutes, 25 minutes, 30 minutes per year. It's a 6-minute, 8-minute visit, and they see them 4 or 5 times a year. That's not meaningful, and therefore the ability to drive engagement tends to be low. We also see a shift towards faster shift towards outpatient services, and things like durable equipment becomes more important, and there's variation in DMA. But also the other soundbite that I found fascinating was, for many of the health plans now, the sum of the costs for prescription drugs and specialty drugs plus services done in a medical facility for prescription drugs now exceed 30% or greater of the total cost of care. So now it bypasses inpatient care, and the rate of growth for that is accelerating. So that is significant and meaningful, and the plans now are all beginning to focus in on, how do I manage that piece? Plus, now it's creating legislative impacts, because patients who have high deductibles are now feeling the burden. And then last is there's again wide variation in price, wide variation in units of services as a function of patient risk, and so everyone that manages risk are now beginning to ask those questions of, is the service that's in specialty drug, is the prescriptions for at the pharmacy, are they appropriate for the member? Is the dosing appropriate? Is the durable medical equipment appropriate for that member? And if not, how do I use an alternative source of services? A lot of headwinds. Plans are really driving it, driven by their customers, which are employers, brokers, and the actual member themselves. With that, I'll pause and.
Dave, it's John. I'm going to ask a couple of questions, for the audience. Between us, we've spent a lot of time together over the last, 18 months across the healthcare continuum, and we've seen more and more on the pharma side, clients talking to us specifically about how to structure partnerships or engage, or to begin thinking about engagement with large payers, large employers. I'm sorry. And so we see a trend going in that direction, followed by the how to approach the IDNs. So there's no surprise there. One of the things that I'm not, maybe would be helpful for the audience, do you find, because you've got much more exposure across the payers and the employers, do you find that they do a better job, employers that being, of managing patient engagement better than the payers themselves? I mean, they have a huge financial risk, as we all know, and we all know that I believe it's, I'm going to genericize it as 10% of the employees' population for driving roughly 80% of their healthcare costs. So are they doing a better, worse, equal job than the payers regarding patient engagement? Are they more creative, crafty? What is your thought on that?
Yeah, John, I'll give you two comments to address employers, but also the IDNs. Employers, and there's been a whole growth of a new industry around patient engagement, whether it's a Accolade or whether it's a Quantum Health or whether it's another organization. There are all these companies that are filling the gaps and saying to employers, the health plans won't be able to provide these services to you. They're still using a lot of what we call historical business models that have nurses only reach X% of the population. But they're always missing the people that will be high-cost users in the next 24 months. And so, therefore, I'm going to intervene as an employer, hire a firm to be a surrogate to engage the members, so there's more members get engaged, so the pipelines are bigger, and the refinement and the outreaches are different. There's more digital outreach, text, email, web types of engagements with patients like me. So I'm a diabetic. I want to be able to speak to other diabetics. So there's a thrust in that. Yeah, whether that's an improvement in cost, that's still to be determined. But I know that in talking to a lot of these new entrants in providing services, they feel that they've produced an ROI. But that's to be measured over time in terms of whether you get regression to the norm. But employers also have incentives and wellness incentives to drive certain engagements, and there's billions of dollars that are being spent in that area. Second thing is in the IDNs, integrated delivery networks, there is a greater viability of these networks to create value-based design. So I was in Pennsylvania, in the western side of Pennsylvania, talking to a large integrated network, and they've begun experimenting with value-based payments, typically for diabetics, but they want to move now towards certain drugs like arthritis, where there's huge spend, huge populations that are emerging in there, and they want to be able to tie it back to their integrated system of specialists and PCP referrals. So we're seeing lots of companies engaging patients, lots of integrated delivery networks beginning to engage patients at the same time, and the issue is that it's not coordinated.
Thanks, Dave. I concur. I'll hold my comments until maybe we move to the next slide, or you want to finish your thoughts?
Sure. No, I'm fine. And the last John, I think it's closer to 2.5 years where we've been on the road together, talking to all these different entities, and I think the marketplace is right now versus what it was 2.5 years ago.
I would agree, Dave. We've seen the market change, shift, react, and then take a step back. I think all in a positive way. And when you say 2.5, I say 18 months, and you say 2.5 years. I think it's actually closer to 3. It means you're keeping track, and I'm not, which makes me worry that you're getting tired of me, Dave. So we'll take that up offline.
That's good.
Al, you can move to the next slide. Well, again, thanks for everybody for joining, and I this is meant to be very much of an iterative discussion amongst the three of us in terms of what we've seen in the marketplace. I've spent 20 years or so working with folks in manufacturing space on the commercial side specifically, and I've seen a lot of changes take place. This is one of the most radical or dynamic changes that is taking place or about to take place. It really does cascade those throughout the organization if you think about it from the top down on the commercial infrastructure side. And one of the things in the last couple of years that we've been really preaching and discussing with our clients has been patience. We've been involved with a number of clients who've called us or phoned us after a press release had hit the wire around some type of value-based care agreement or arrangements, only to never hear from them again in terms of what that follow-up was. Instead, though, they end up discussing that with us in terms of having either rushed through the analytics, missed a piece of the work that should have been missed. For example, missed identifying acts of God when building out the model and understanding the risk of the patient population. Something as simple as that, or truly not understanding the nuances of data that are being passed between the payer and the manufacturer or vice versa, and not really knowing what is, what are we missing in this transactional database. So we've been the partner now for almost 4 years for a number of our clients, being that middle ground arbiter and introducing these risk and impactability models to manufacturers, and then thinking through how to utilize them, not just from value-based care, but from other marketing and commercial purposes. But you can see the sort of continuum slide, and we can argue that some of these bullets in advance or in deliver or measure outcomes can be shifted around. Again, it really does depend on the client journey themselves. I'll say something I've been saying for the last few years. If we use a baseball analogy, there really isn't a client there. And I speak of a client, I'm talking about a biopharma or med device client in the market today that's past the fourth inning. A couple of years ago, I'd argue that was the second inning. I think folks are getting a little more sophisticated and slowing down their thought process and acting a little more constructively or thinking through this a little more constructively for the long term. But we're still in the early part of the ball game in terms of thinking, what does this look like moving forward, and how do you think about a way to standardize this approach for all of your therapeutic areas? Now, naturally, the data, the insight will differ. Patient population will differ, the segments of the patient, the risk model itself will differ, but the way you want to approach it is essentially the same, and having a standard data model that can expand and learn and grow, and that will predict those next 3, 6, 9, 12 months of patient risk and impactability, so you can be ahead of the curve and then mobilize forces accordingly. I realize in pharma, when it comes to marketing and sales, you can't turn that ship that fast. And I haven't found a client yet that can turn the ship in 3 months. 6 months might be more realistic in terms of thinking about pivoting in terms of digital spend or non-digital spend, or aligning on messaging to providers. But that's only one piece of the equation. The conversation with the payer has to be measured. As Kevin pointed out, the outcomes have to agreed upon that could be measurable from both sides in an easy fashion in that 12-month window. And 12 months, maybe it's 9 months, but it's really up to that 12-month window. Then thereafter, we have to allow for a shift in how the patient population is responding, a shift in are the payers, or in this case, maybe the self-insureds, the large employer groups, can they pull through the care that is required to help drive better patient care and a lower PMPM by member type, and thus driving better care from the provider standpoint, and then of course a better, healthier patient. It requires a number of patients and a number of touch points. The reason why I've always been excited about this from the life sciences perspective is that the strength of life sciences is that of having the partnership with the payer, and having, at this point in time today, companies like SCIO, for example, that could act as third-party partners objectively and help be a piece of the model build or the full model build in terms of thinking of what does a risk model look like, and what is acceptable from both sides of the equation, from the payers and from the life science clients. So there's no ambiguity of what does risk mean and what does impactability mean for our member population before we engage in something value-based. But beyond that, you've got the ability, your other, three customer base, if you will. Your other customers are in fact the providers. You've got great touch point, and granted, limited time with face-to-face interactions, but a population of providers that is always looking for something new to discuss. Being able to share with them within an approved fashion a segmentation of a patient type or types, generically speaking. Why don't these patients adhere to their medication? What is the norm? What have we seen? And what is the way to then message that to them, Dr. Smith? You have that channel, and that's a nice channel to have as a structure point in the organization. The third customer base are your consumers, essentially the patients. And with regard to digital messaging today, sort of in the advent of digital messaging, banner ads, WebMD, Doximity type services, there's a lot of different services that can be done that can be regionalized and messaged accordingly. And then those messages can be pivoted and shifted very quickly. But there's a lot of spend happening there. We spend a lot of time with clients thinking through how to segment that. But all of this, the continuous theme is it takes time, it's patience. There are bullets here that are common sense, standard, that can be standardized across the organization or therapeutic area to think through how do we develop for lack of a better word, a center of excellence when we're talking to an IDN or a self-insured or just large regional payers. How do we think about risk and impactability? How do we then utilize that across our whole commercial infrastructure and make that standard nomenclature, standard thinking process? That's, I think, as Dave pointed out, I think that's what's more exciting today than probably arguably a year and a half ago, where it was a little bit of a rush in some cases, not every case, some cases just to get a press release out and do something. And then again, in most cases, we really haven't seen results of those. And in most cases, we've been called in to help, in fact, clean up some of that or further assist, I should say. Maybe that's a better word. But I think this is a great time for us, for all of us, to be thinking this way. As a patient, understanding that I have a lot of information at my fingertips to understand my condition and the reasons why specific medication work or doesn't work for me, but also that ecosystem of providers and care services. When you harness all of that, it could really drive favorable outcomes. And then using the analytics, machine learning, insight with the data that's available to us today, to all of us today, that can really be a point of a great point of contact that is a triple crown winner. A winner for the patient, winner for the provider, of course, I should say a triple, quadruple winner for the IDN in terms of lower overall total cost of care, and of course for us, better adherence and a better managed patient. So I'll stop there. Again, we can talk. I think we've talked a lot in terms of the spectrum and continuum. Al, are we going to review the questions, or are we going to open the session for a Q&A session?
We're going to review the polling question. I wanted to give an opportunity for either Kevin or for David to have any response to your discussion points.
Let me make this comment that the final common pathway in these contracts is quality of care, and that is inarguable. No provider wants to save money for the payer. That's not on their radar screen. But all the elements in providing healthcare, the hospitals, pharma, the individual physician providers, the ED, skilled nursing, the common pathway that can be rallied around is quality. So the contracts have to have a theme that we're doing this for quality because it makes it bulletproof. And as far as finding how to measure that quality, it isn't deep. It would be something that is easy to understand and measurable. So the final common pathway that everybody wants is quality of care for the patient, and all these contracts have that as the outcome.
I have this is Dave Holm. I have a question for John, which is based on what Kevin's talked about. What's been the what I would call a speed bump for life science companies to migrate more aggressively into an outcomes-based contract or value-based payment structure?
I think there's a couple of answers, and I'll try to be brief, just being conscientious of time. I think number one is a lot of our clients and a lot of pharma clients in general, the word patient risk, patient impactability, which have been standard nomenclature, if you will, on the payer side for a number of years, it's a new way to think about the patient over the next 12 months. And it's a new way to then level set on, if we're going to go into an arrangement, a value-based arrangement, how do we then level set on agreement of the patient? That's a new type of an analytics model to pharma. And some will say it isn't, of course, but for most it is. So we see that. Secondly, it's stepping into the unknown. Nobody really knows how to structure a contract around this. And as you know, Dave, we're not contract, we don't structure contracts on behalf of clients. We instead engage with analytics and level setting on how to decipher the information being relayed about the patient population. The third equation, there is this has been for years and years, as we all know, there's a mistrust between the organizations. Payers don't trust the data or insight being provided them by life sciences. Life sciences don't trust the data being provided by the payers. And it's part of that is, well, it's biased. It's your data. Of course, it's going to be biased, beneficial to your drug. There's that. So there's a bit of a skepticism going on there. And this, as you know, but there's ways that we've worked around that. Having a good trusted third-party partner that has no skin in the game in that regard, but that's well known on both sides, is a beneficial aspect to this. And then lastly, I think that there is nervousness, and we've told clients this in the fact that, after we run these models, what if it is proven and shown that my drug does not, in fact, perform well in the class against our competitors and driving better total cost of care? And, the argument there is, well, that could be the case. Although I would counter argue and say that almost in every instance, we have found information or insight that was beneficial to the drug. It might not be the best in the class in terms of driving cost of care. So the question might be, do you then engage in those types of discussions? Is there a way around that, if possible? If not, we've got a client now a large client that, working with us in several different ways. They want to be established for when these questions come, that they prefer not to go down this road. It's been a top-down discussion point. They prefer not to engage in value-based care discussions. Again, that's their choice, their decision. We've found a number of positive outcomes from the analysis of their product being used in the marketplace today, which they can then use. Again, ultimately, it's their decision. But they're thinking of it more as a blunting strategy. If pressed, the information's available. We're not going to go down this path otherwise. They're an expensive drug. It's a different mindset, different thought process. But I think those overall are some of the top reasons, Dave.
Thank you.
John, I'm going to interject here. We have the results of our polling questions. And this addressed some of the comments that you made as well. Does everyone see the results of polling question number 1?
do, Al.
Pardon me?
I see. This is John. I see the results. If you were asking.
Okay. So I was asking. Thank you. I was just wondering whether the panelists would like to comment. The question was regarding the biggest challenge in conducting a risk-based contract is, and you see there's the vast majority is on performance metrics, acceptable levels of success. I was wondering whether you guys want to comment on that.
Yeah, I will. In creating the metrics, it's going to sound pretty simple. And is this going to be meaningful? That we are we going to have an ROI on what we're investing in this? And the answer is yes. That the quality of care out in U.S. healthcare leaves opportunity for significant improvement. We know that about a third of healthcare is wasted. So if simple things are accomplished, such as the diabetic gets 2 blood tests a year, that's a tremendous success because it's not happening now. So even though it sounds, well, that's really simple, if that is accomplished, there will be a quality improvement and a savings. And the key thing is getting started, getting the provider to accept that this is going to be a measured parameter. Oh, that's pretty simple. And then if that is achieved, then it can be built upon. So don't be afraid to start with something basic and then build on it, because even something basic, when accomplished, will have a tremendous outcome, knowing that proper care gets accomplished in chronic illness only about a third of the time right now.
Okay. Now going to the second question. The biggest problem with the analytics associated with a value-based contract is, and have a tie for first place, acceptance of the underlying data set and the ease of measuring the metrics. Comments, please, gentlemen.
This is John. I'll take a stab, and I think then Dave will want to jump in. But first off, Al, I'd like to see the decimal point for those first two answers, just to see essentially decimal point to the right. Let's go 10 numbers out. But listen, I'm not surprised by this, especially the acceptance of the underlying data set by providers. It's one of the things that we have seen, and I'm speaking for myself, having worked in life sciences for a number of years with clients, but haven't been exposed now for the last 2 years, 2.5 years to the payers, providers, health systems. It truly is amazing how payers handling PHI data could be sitting in multiple data sets or databases in their organization, unstructured, in some cases hard to query, not interconnected. It's a challenge. I mean, that's part of the reason why SCIO has had a lot of success on the other side of a business a number of years, is just helping manage those data sets. So I'm not surprised by this. The other component is we see it often because, again, we've seen that data. We know what to look for, what to expect, what file layouts look like, what's missing, what isn't missing. In the advent today of, for example, EMR data, which is, has lately been all the rage, a lot of information. What do I do with it? There's so much information, I don't even know what to make sense of. What variables are actually contributing to anything meaningful? It's the same thing with payer data when it's being ingested by pharma companies today, at least from what we've seen. So there's still a learning process to happen there. And again, self-promoting, I'll say this from our perspective, as a partner to these organizations on the pharma side, that's one of the benefit adds to this, is that we have data. We don't necessarily need the provider or the payer data, I should say, direct from them. We have a database that will allow us to build the analysis and the structure of the analysis, and then ingest the data on behalf of our life science clients. So it's a nice model, and I agree. Data is never easy. I think in a couple of years, this question won't be, this answer won't be 40%. Probably be closer to 15 or 20. Today, though, it does. Ease of measuring the metrics, I think it's similar to what we just discussed, or what Kevin had just mentioned about keeping it simple. I think a lot of folks become analysis paralysis with this. Try to oversimplify what we're thinking about measuring, at least in that first year. The first year, your job, part of your job in pharma is to determine, is that payer that we're working with that's challenging us with a value-based contract, are they even the right partner to partner with? Can they pull through the care services that they are in need to do beyond what we can do? And that's a big question mark. That's one of the assessments that has to be made. In some cases, the answer is maybe no. And if that's the case, a simplified type of metric is best. And maybe it stays that way forever. And there's, you're not going to see the greatest success metrics of all time with that particular payer. There should be something there of success. But Kevin, Dave, do you want to add anything to that? I mean, that's what I've seen. But if you want to add anything,
we're out of time. I'd like to just flash up I agree with your comments. I'd like to flash up the last question just so our audience can see it. Wow.
How about that? So
I'm glad. Yeah, well, I'm glad to see that it's coming from within our healthcare system. If we don't solve this, it's going to be solved for us. So what we want to do is, and I'm talking about the medical cost index. If we don't address it, it's going to be addressed for us. And I like the thinking that I see with this.
Okay, gentlemen, I'm going to, because of time, we do have a question from the audience that I'll open it up to the panelists. Are there certain therapeutic classes or diseases for which value-based care and contracting makes most sense?
That's good, John. If you can cover that.
Yeah, I mean, so we've done a lot over the last 3 years, somewhere close to 20 or so orphan-based, non-orphan-based conditions, chronic, non-chronic based conditions, cancer-based conditions. I mean, the argument would be is that the biggest cost drivers out in the marketplace today are going to be your chronic conditions. So chronic conditions, the diabetes, COPD, cardiovascular conditions, those by all means are some of the best value-based care type of engagement or discussions. It's rich with data, and there's no shortage of companies out there that are trying to provide services to patients or consumers and to providers around those conditions. So there's a lot of ways, I think, today in which to think that through. Now, again, won't rule out how to think through regionalized approach to care pathways for multiple myeloma, for example, or prostate cancer. There's certainly plenty of stories to be had there in those areas that are equally patient population naturally lower. You may find that payers are not as interested in having those discussions because of the smaller population. But the chronic conditions, I would argue, are the 10 or 15 or so are the ones that everyone seems to be marinating on today.
Thanks, John. Thank you, gentlemen, all of you, Kevin, David, John, for your candid and thought-provoking insights today. I'd also like to thank the audience for taking the time to join us today. If you'd like someone from SCIO to contact you about what you've seen and heard today, please visit the Contact Us page on our website. As a reminder, today's session was recorded and will be sent along to you in the coming days. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes today's webinar. Thank you for your participation and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Al. Appreciate it.
Thank you.